Radio 87.9 FM, and I am your host and presenter, Zainab Sattar, on my show, Breaking Stereotypes. Today's show is called My Disability, My Life, and literally what it says on the tin. But we will get into that a little bit more and explore the reason why we have tonight's guests. So, before I start introducing my guests, just for the listeners and the viewers out there, if you wish to send in any comments or any questions, then please do text or WhatsApp 077 488 55055. You can also call into the studio, which is 0116 4822 086, and you can also email in at info@ramadan.fm. We are also live on YouTube and Facebook, and if you wish to chat on there, then please do so by accessing Ramadan Radio. So, tonight's guest, My Disability, My Life. First off, we have Amara Kasim. She's currently studying the LPC and the LLM, the LPC being legal practice course at Democrat University full-time. She's also a part-time paralegal at a firm called Regendra Solicitors. She works in their wills and probate team. She's been there for about 6 weeks now. She also has a weekend job at Mint Securities, and she also works in her mum's salon in the evenings and her free time. So that's quite a lot that she does. She suffers from mild dyslexia and mild dyspraxia and was diagnosed in her first year at college. Our next guest is Saleha Kotia. She's also an aspiring solicitor, currently a full-time legal practice course student at Democrat University, and she currently has a disability called osteogenesis imperfecta, simply known as brittle bone disease. Then next, our third guest, and last but not least, I should say, we have Tyler Neville Regendran. She's currently an undergraduate at University of Leicester studying law. She will be talking about her experience with invisible disabilities, and specifically she wants to raise awareness on the borderline personality disorder, commonly known as BPD. Now, before I start asking our questions to our guests, my viewers and listeners are probably wondering, why is it that I'm always having law students or somebody to do with law on my show? And that's because for the past few years, I'm only surrounded by law students and surrounded by qualified solicitors and barristers. But I do know other people as well, I guarantee you that. But the reason why I focus this year a lot on uni students is because they go through a lot in their life. And because they are young and sometimes perceived as healthy, they may get overlooked at times in terms of, can they have handled challenges? Do they in fact have challenges? Especially those students who are probably living at home or possibly living away from home, but where they are seen as being comfortable. And those who are listening to me, I did comfortable in quote marks. So that's why I've got a few students. So I want to start off with Amara first. Amara, you suffer from mild dyslexia and mild dyspraxia. Could you please explain what that is?
Yeah, so dyslexia is kind of a...
They have to clean all the microphones.
About explaining this. The thing is, I know I have it, it's just hard to explain. So with dyslexia, it's kind of, I suffer mostly with short-term memory. So I forget things really quickly. Someone will explain something to me, and then I will forget what they've said within like 5 minutes, and I'll get really confused. And dyspraxia is a coordination disability where it's basically, my coordination's not too bad, but then I can't use a lot of systems very easily. It takes me longer to learn systems. My hands and my body work quicker than my brain. So I'll do something and then I'll think, why did I just do that? That's basically what both of them are.
Okay. So in terms of the dyslexia element of it, my only knowledge of it is quite limited, unfortunately, but it's also to do with reading and writing, am I correct? Where you can't always interpret the actual letters of certain words, and then you write them differently as well. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah, so you get different types, because obviously with every disability, you get different types of dyslexia. So with mine personally, it's not reading. Alhamdulillah, it's not reading, it's writing. I'll write B's as D's, and then actually, to be fair, it is reading as well. I'll read something and I won't understand for like 2-3 times I'll read it and I'll be so confused. And my friends will read it once and then they'll have to explain. So I think with other people, they read a lot slower because it registers a lot slower as well.
Okay, all right. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. I want to come back to you in a little while and explore a little bit further about the challenges that you've faced throughout your, I'd say teenage years, because you were diagnosed whilst you were at college. So that would have been, a tough nut in itself. I'm going to move on to Saleha. So Saleha, you are, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but you are in a wheelchair. And I remember I met you at De Montfort University when I was there to give a lecture to the students, and you were actually one of the first to approach me and ask questions. So you were very proactive in that, and that's what gave me you gave me the opportunity to become friends with you, and you exposed me to your sort of life and allowed me to bring you onto the show tonight. So do you want to just give me, I hope I said your osteogenesis imperfecta correctly, brittle bone disease. Can you tell me what that is?
Yeah, it's basically a genetic disorder. So it's usually through genetic, obviously it passes down. So I'm not the first of my family. In my generation, I am the first, but in my family, I'm not the first to have the disability. It's basically a disorder that affects the bones and the way they're obviously. So my bones than the average human being. So calcium. So their construct is different or a lot weaker than the average, obviously, human being who doesn't have brittle bone disease. So in simply, my bones are brittle. So because of that, one of the side effects are bone deformality. So obviously, I have one of the severest types of the disability. So my bones are deformed in the sense. So I'm a wheelchair user. So because of that, I can't walk. So I am mobile, but obviously my mobility and movement is different than obviously the average person. So I can't walk and stuff like that. So I'm wheelchair bound. Yeah.
So your mobility is restricted?
Yeah.
But from what I've seen, your life is not restricted because you are in university, you are studying, and you are being proactive when you want to look to see the next steps in your future. And I admire you for that, Saleha. Hats off to you for that. I'm going to move on to Tyler, Neville, Regendra. And Tyler, I don't know actually if you know, but Neville, spelt backwards, is actually heaven, and it's the same name as my neighbour's daughter. So when I saw that, I was like, oh, I know what Neville is. But Tyler, you want to raise awareness on something effectively known as an invisible disability, which is or can surround us almost all the time. And when you mentioned this to me, one of the first things I said to you was, that's actually quite important to raise awareness on, because imagine somebody parking up in a disabled spot, in Asda or Tesco, and they come out and they don't put a disabled badge in their, dashboard or something, and immediately the first thought that may come into people's minds is, oh my God, that person's not even disabled. How dare they use that parking spot? And, once or twice I have been guilty of it in my naive days, when I was really naive and I didn't realize the kind of illnesses and diseases that exist. So you want to raise awareness on that. Can you please explain a little bit more about what it is that you want to speak about?
So borderline personality disorder, commonly referred to as BPD, is when you're emotionally unstable, and it's not your regular, oh, my mood's up and down. It's a bit more complicated than that. So I personally suffer from it, and as a result, I have a hard time establishing relationships with other people, trying to keep my emotions in check. I also experience intense emotions, which can really be disruptive in your daily life. On top of that, I do have destructive behavior as well, where I either binge eat, I go on a shopping spree and spend as much money, or I just isolate myself. That's how I deal with it. Another thing is that I do have a sense of paranoia, which can be intensified during times. And one thing that I really do struggle with is disassociating episodes. So they're basically me just tuning out of reality, but it's quite scary. It's actually really scary. And the thing is, when you look at someone, you immediately tell if they've got a disability or not because of the fact that it takes on a physical form. With people with mental health disabilities, like me and, well, Amara, but for her, it's not mental health. She's got a disability that you can't see. It's quite hard for us people because people really don't acknowledge it.
I can imagine. And being so young as well, that in itself can be a challenge as well, especially when, you might be in front of a person of, senior authority. I remember when I was at university, and this is completely nothing like what you guys have been through in terms of having to prove your disability. But I was in one of my criminal law lectures. I was sitting next to my best friend, Kelly, and the teacher was trying to give us an example on something that had happened back in 2008. And I'd completely zoned out because back in 2008 we didn't have a telly and we weren't really watching the news and stuff, and I'd had my youngest child at that point and I was just focusing on her and the business. And when I had no idea what he was talking about, and he turned around and he goes, well, what the hell were you doing? And I was like, well, raising my child and working and doing my business. And he didn't believe the fact that I had 4 children because I didn't look it. To him, I didn't look 28 or 29, whatever age I was. To him, I looked, 21, 22, which, thank you very much for that, sir. I appreciate that. But not only did I have to prove that I was a mother of 4 children, but he then asked my friends, is she lying? So it was like he didn't trust me, and he immediately needed to seek confirmation, which was actually quite upsetting. And again, like I said, that's nowhere near compared to what you've all been through. But being in that position where you are constantly asked what it is, I can imagine how frustrating it can also be. And being the age you were, I was quite mature, so I think I was able to handle it quite well. But given your life experiences may be a bit limited at the moment, I can imagine what you've all been through. So talking about the challenges that you've got, so going back to Amara, you mentioned quite a few things there in terms of coordination and having to have special systems in place and then sometimes you can't read the D's and the B's properly. So you're at university, and from everything I know about you, you are you're working part-time, you're studying full-time, and then you're doing things in your free time as well. So that's a lot of things that you're taking on. What about the challenges that you've actually faced at university in terms of what has the university done for you? Have they put special measures in place in order for you to overcome your challenges? What about your workplace? Have they put something in for your challenges?
So when I first started working, I wasn't diagnosed. So they had no idea that I was dyslexic or dyspraxic. No, sorry, they did. But I didn't mention it because I was like, if I mention the fact that I'm dyslexic, no one's gonna they're gonna think that I'm stupid, that I can't do anything. So I didn't tell them. And obviously university, I had to tell them because I could get extra time because I genuinely needed that in my exams. And you know what, when I did actually come out and tell my workplace, because I was struggling so much with using the systems, I was like, I need to tell someone. And once I told them, they were so accommodating. They put these measures in place where they'd give me extra training, they would sit with me longer, things like that. And it helped so much because I wasn't feeling behind from everyone else. I think universities was really good as well in terms of putting measures into place. Disabled student allowance would pay for whatever I needed, extra printing, because I need certain colours. Extra printing, they would pay for that. I think everyone was really good. I think the hard part was when I didn't know I had dyslexia when I was at school. I think that was the part where I faced most of my challenges because I didn't know what I needed myself.
Okay. So when you were in school and it wasn't diagnosed at that point, obviously there wouldn't have been any special measures in place. How did you overcome those challenges, given the fact that you actually didn't know that you suffered from this? How did you overcome your challenges then?
I kind of just thought I'm not smart. That's all it was. I kind of just thought I was in the lower sets quite a lot. And like I said before, a lot of people would understand things and I would still be sitting there and I would be so confused and I would be so lost as what's going on. So I think the thing that I did was I worked really, really, really hard. I think I worked harder than, obviously I can't say that I worked harder than my friends, but I worked double the time amount that my friends worked, just to understand simple things. And that's why I do a lot right now. That's why I kind of keep myself busy, because I never want those skills to fall. I kind of always want to be on top of understanding everything, learning new things. And I think that helped me overcome it a lot, knowing that I could do it. I passed my GCSEs and I got decent grades after that as well.
It's giving you a different work ethos, like myself as well. I really do class myself as a mediocre student, you know, average grades throughout. I have to read a page, I think 3 times before I can understand it, whereas all my friends and everybody else, they can read it in the one page and, you know, move on. And my producer is actually nodding his head and wagging his finger at me because he does not believe me when I say that, but I actually believe it. You know, I do have average grade. The only time I ever got a merit was in my legal practice course, but that was all based on all practical skills where I brought 25 odd years worth of work experience when I did that course. I'm going to move on to Saleha now, if I may, please. So we've got about 8 minutes before the break. So Saleha, in terms of the challenges that you faced, I mean, you are, I have to say this, different than everybody else. And for me, I see that as a blessing more than anything else, because being different is honestly the best thing that can probably happen to people, because you see things in a different way, you take your challenges in a different way, your work ethos is also different. But for you, your challenges would have been very different given the fact that your mobility was restricted and you are having to go to universities. Now, I remember when I was in that lecture room and you were sitting there, the lecture room in itself was benches, a bit like America style, where, you know, you've got your top rows, like when you go to see baseball or something like that. Now, I remember you being in the first row. In terms of the university, or what kind of measures did they put in place for you to be able to overcome your challenges? How easy was it for you?
First of all, I just wanted to say I'm sorry I've had to turn my camera off because my connection is not very good. So I've turned it off so I can like hear everyone properly.
No worries.
So I'm not hiding anything like unintentionally. In terms of the like things put in place, university for me was really good. College was okay, but university they were amazing in terms like that. Like Amara, I went to DMU, so they were very helpful from the get-go, and they were constantly asking me like, what do you need? What can we do to like make your journey in DMU easy from a disability perspective. And so they offered me at the beginning like a one-to-one. So because I'm obviously a wheelchair user, and the average obviously student in DMU is obviously able-bodied, so they're walking everywhere. And obviously in such a obviously there's a lot of students, so there's like a lot of rush, especially like going to and from lectures and stuff like that. And at the beginning, because it was new to me as well, being in that environment, because when I went to school, I went to a special needs school, so I was surrounded by people with different disabilities, but a lot of them were like wheelchair users. So I was in an environment where it was very like the same as what I'm going through, or very similar. Whereas obviously in uni and college it's very different, because I'm surrounded by obviously all walks of life of people, so majority of them are not wheelchair users. So at the beginning, I found it very daunting, like uni. I was so scared. And at the beginning, I used to think I was already struggling personally, like the educational part of it. Like I'm as well not very like, the greatest student academically either. But so that I was struggling with, plus my physical obstacles that I was facing. At the beginning, I found it very daunting. But so in my first year, at the beginning, I kept a one-to-one with me, just to walk me to and from like lectures and stuff like that. And then I would start getting used to routine and making friends and like interacting with people, and it was all becoming like more familiar to me. So, and then like halfway through my first year, I remember going to the disability team and and saying, I don't need like a one-to-one anymore. I want to experience it on my own, because when you have a one-to-one, with you, although you're conversing with like your peers in like the lecture, obviously at the beginning when it starts or when it ends as well, and afterwards people look at you like, well, you're with your one-to-one now, so like, they don't want to like stick with you, and I get that, because obviously someone's hovering over you, like that's an adult, yeah, and you're not, obviously it's not like the relationship is different. So then I was just like, well, I'm used to the routine now, so I just want to experience it like on my own, and if I obviously struggle, then I'll come back to you. And they were really helpful, and they were really polite, and yeah, it was amazing. And then I also have the other side of like help in terms of like the disability student allowance, so like for transport and also printing and stuff like that, because I struggle with like like obviously in law we have a lot of reading, so reading on a computer for me, like electronically, for me it doesn't help sink in like the content in my brain. I need physical paper, and I need to read it a couple of times as well and stuff like that. So like printing allowances and stuff like that, yeah, it's been like DMU has been really helpful in that sense.
Well, that's really great to hear. So from basically between you and Amara, it's a case of, well, if you speak out and ask for the assistance, you get that assistance,
Yeah.
because people nowadays are more aware of putting measures in place, and it helps that UK legislation also assists in that matter. I'm going to come on to Tyler. Tyler, we have about 3 minutes before we go on to break. So if you can talk about the challenges, because for you, it is an invisible disability, so it might be a bit more difficult for you to reach out, get those measures put in place. So can you tell us a little bit more about what you faced and how you were able to reach out for assistance?
So in terms of what I faced, it was, as I mentioned before, just trying to establish relationships, trying to keep it going, trying to reach out for help, because one of the kind of like, not really symptoms, but issues that come along with BPD is that it is very hard to talk to other people. So when I did finally reach out, the support network was honestly amazing in terms of my GP, mental health communities, my university, and accommodation as well, because I'm staying in uni accommodation. So many people have been really accommodating and understanding. But it's the idea of, with invisible disabilities, no one's going to know until you reach out. And that's the really hard part. It's speaking up for yourself, which is something that's really hard to do.
It's communication skills as well, isn't it? And it's not like you can walk around with a sign all the time that says, hey, I suffer from this,
Yeah.
And it comes down to that. I mean, again, I don't know how, they say walk a mile in my shoes and you know how I feel. I mean, I can't walk in your shoes because that's something that you are suffering from, but I kind of would say I mirror some of what you guys have been through, given all the different experiences I have. And one of the things that is frustrating for me is my weight. I suffer from diastasis recti, which is muscle gap. And I also have polycystic ovaries, which I'm quite open about talking, but friends and family don't understand. To them, it's a case of, well, you used to be a size 8 or a 10. Now you're like a 14 or a 16. How dare you put on that weight? It's that kind of situation. And for them, it's like, how many times do I say to you, I'm not going to walk around with a sign on my face saying, hey, I'm not pregnant, I'm not fat. This is what the situation is. And it can be very difficult. It can be very frustrating, especially when I bump into somebody after such a long time. And instead of saying salam to me, or hey, Zainab, how are you? The first thing they turn around and say, oh my God, Zainab, you put on so much weight. And the only way I can answer that is I walk around and say, well, don't you know, I'm 14 months pregnant. And that gets them thinking. It's like, what's that? But, I mean, like I said, I'm not comparing my situation with yours. Everybody suffers in a different way. It's all about communication. It's all about speaking out. It's all about getting that assistance. And sometimes communication can be quite difficult. But it's also about having the right circle, the right group of people. You want people who keep you're going, they're positive, there should be no negative vibes from them, because without a good support system, it would be very difficult for you to be able to do what you need to do. So we have a few seconds before we go on to break. So this is Breaking Stereotypes, My Disability, My Life. 101.9 FM. You are listening to Zainab Sattar on Breaking Stereotypes. And today's show is My Disability, My Life. Just a reminder to our viewers and listeners of the telephone numbers and the contact details if you wish to send in a question or a comment. To text or WhatsApp, it's 077 488 55055. To call into the studio, it's 0116 4822 Or to email in, it's info@ramadan.fm. So just a quick recap of the guests that we have today. We have Amara Kasim, Saleha Kotia, and Tyler Regendra. All university students. Amara and Saleha go to De Montfort University studying the legal practice course, having undertaken their law degree, and Tyler is a first-year law student. So Amara suffers from mild dyslexia and dyspraxia. Saleha has, and apologies Saleha, I don't have the actually I might have it in front of me. She has osteogenesis imperfecta, otherwise known as brittle bone disease. And Tyler wants to talk about, she has BPD. Tyler, could you just remind us what BPD is again, please?
So BPD stands for borderline personality disorder, commonly referred to as unstable emotional personality disorder.
Okay. Now, you mentioned earlier that it's difficult for you to have relationships, make those relationships with people. I want to expand a little bit on that. Given that you are a first-year uni student, you're quite young, in terms of where you are in your life. That must have been quite difficult throughout high school, college, university. Could you just explain a bit about any challenges that you could have faced? Were you bullied at all, or how did you get through all of that?
So I only got recently diagnosed as BPD later on last year, so towards winter time. Before that, they just said, "Oh, you're just emotionally unstable." And I was like, okay, doesn't really kind of explain what's going on with me. In terms of high school, it was a struggle. I always thought that the world was wrong and I was always right, that everyone else had issues and I'm just, the perfect one. But that's kind of how you feel having BPD. You feel like either you're wrong or you're right. And in terms of the challenges I had in university, well, given that everything's virtual and you can't really meet people, that has actually played to my advantage. I am quite an introverted person. I don't really like talking to new people, but paired with the fact that I do have BPD, it's like I don't want to talk to anyone at all, and it makes you feel very lonely. And the friends that I do have, it is very hard to keep them around. For those who do have BPD, they feel very isolated. And in terms of my actual family members as well, I have a very hard time keeping in touch with them, communicating with them. It's just really hard communication-wise.
And currently the fact that we are going through a pandemic, I suppose that's not helped things much. I know you said that it worked to your advantage because you are an introvert and you felt isolated, but that would have kind of added to the fact that you would have then purposely, or I should have used the word purposely, where you were even more isolated than before, and therefore could have felt a little bit more alone than usual. Hats off to you for being able to get through this situation. I can imagine that it's not an easy thing, especially being in university, having to stay in your dorm rooms, having to study. That in itself is quite difficult, and there's a lot of challenges.
Horrible. It's really horrible just staying in by yourself.
Yeah, and one thing I do want to just highlight before I go on to the next question is that despite all of these challenges, all three of you have continued to persevere. You've carried on with university. Some of you have taken up extra voluntary roles or part-time working roles, and you should be proud of the skill set that you actually have. And I have a lot of mentees. In fact, Amara's my mentee. Tyler, you've just become my mentee as well recently. And one of the skill sets I always say to you guys is think outside the box. there's so many graduates coming out of university and so little jobs out there that are related to their degree. What is it about you that makes you stand out? And it's not all about playing to the other side's criteria. Sometimes you might have a criteria that you think is suitable, yet they don't know it. And when you start thinking outside the box, and I said this to you, Tyler, the other day, that actually you can put in there that you've been caring for your brother and your mother who also suffer, mental illnesses or disabilities, and that will show your employers or your prospective employers that actually she can handle various challenges, because that's what the law is all about. That's what professional careers is all about. It's client management, it's customer care. And if you can handle difficult situations, what's stopping you from handling a difficult situation at work? So, you do need to start thinking outside the box. So in terms of, we've covered the challenges that you've all been through. We've covered special measures that you've all been through. I want to now talk about moving a bit away from, you've all touched upon, friendship circles, and how, Tyler, you mentioned it's difficult for you to maintain a friendship. And for you young ladies, the age that you're at, friendship is, almost everything, isn't it? I know it is for my kids, especially when I wanted to move schools for them. They were like, no, none of my friends go to that school. It's all about that. You mentioned that universities have put measures in place. What about personal life? Tyler, you've already mentioned that it's been difficult for you to maintain relationships. Can I dig a bit deeper and say to you, okay, if you found relationships, maintaining them really difficult and having friends around, what would you have then done? What did you do if you did not have those friends around you?
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I think I would have relied on my family a bit more. And if that was the case, then I honestly wouldn't have had any interpersonal skills. I wouldn't have been able to socialize with people. Regardless of the fact that I'm an introvert, I still wouldn't have been able to even just pop up to someone and say hello or ask how they're doing. It would have really affected not only my personal life, but my work life, my education, just everything. I would have been so, and I don't mean this in a negative way, I would have been very timid and just extremely closed off.
So your introvert that you say you say you're an introvert, that would have gone even more deeper.
Yeah.
I can imagine. And Saleha, for you, yours would have been very different, possibly to Amara and Tyler, given your mobility being restricted. You've got the severe end of the brittle bone disease, and you've mentioned, you've got the transport in place, you've got the extra printing in place, you've got university in place. What about you when it comes to your personal life? For me, if I want to go ride on my motorbike today, other than the fact that I'm short, as my producer has reminded me constantly today, I can just leave the house and take the bike out, although I get my husband to do all of that, hard work. I just get on my bike and off I go. But in terms for you, nowadays, there's a lot more awareness for the less able-bodied, where it's quite, disabled access is there, but not everywhere. And I've noticed that there's a lot of places still out there where it's not suitable for disabled users. What about in terms of your personal life? Say if you wanted to just go into a restaurant or you wanted to go grab yourself a takeaway, how does that work? How do you overcome those challenges?
Personally for me, and especially for wheelchair users, I would say that although the accessibility image has improved a lot within the last 10 years or so, or even more, but even then I think there's a lot more improvement, and there's a lot of space for improvement in every aspect of industries and avenues, like whether that's education or working, or even restaurants and eating. Before I decide I'm gonna go out, or I'm gonna leave my house to run an errand or go out to eat or meet up with friends, and when we're deciding, say if somebody's like, oh, let's meet up, but then for me personally, and even for wheelchair users, I think an extra step we have to think about is is there going to be accessibility in the place? A lot of the times, like, my friends, they'll pick a place to eat, but it won't be wheelchair accessible. So I'll be like, well, I can't come to that place. And sometimes I'll be like, oh, it's okay. You guys go ahead and we can, go to another place as well. Like, go for dessert elsewhere and I'll meet you up then. But then they're like, no, everyone, obviously the whole point is meeting up and, being together and stuff. So my friends are really like, supportive and understanding in that sense. But even like, I'm working and, like right now I'm constantly applying for jobs and roles because I'm due to finish my LPC soon. Also, like, I'm looking for jobs and stuff like that. But when I'm applying, I have to, look at not just where I'm applying or the company and not just the role that I want, but also, is it wheelchair accessible? Is there, the workplace, is it wheelchair accessible? Is it for me commutable? Because I'm a wheelchair user, so obviously I can't just like leave my house and, walk however many miles, or I can't just hop on in a taxi. If I'm going to book a taxi, I need to make sure that it's a wheelchair accessible taxi. So they're even limited. So, and they're, you can't call a taxi company today and like, I need a wheelchair taxi, because then you need to pre-book them a day or a couple of days in advance, because they're limited. The drivers are limited, the wheelchair accessible cabs are limited. So it's not like an instant thing. So there's a lot more stuff we as wheelchair users have to take into account, which I think is obviously, it is what it is. At the end of the day, you can't dwell on it like, it's unfair or it's fair, because it is what it is at the end of the day, whether it's fair or not. But we just have to like make do and, make sure that you take those factors into account whenever I'm going to apply for a job or go out to eat or, meet up with friends or stuff like that. So it's difficult, but I've also grown into, like it's become sort of normal for me. So I guess, yeah.
So basically what I've taken from that is not only is there extra work for you to do on your part in terms of trying to have something of a normal life, normal in, speech marks again, for you to be able to move around, but also there still needs to be a lot done in terms of you being able to access certain places. So we are still behind in times when it comes to having it wheelchair accessible. Saleha, I have to admit, I did not realize with taxis that you have to pre-book, a day or two in advance, and it's not just as easy as going onto your Uber app and, getting, ordering an Uber and coming down. And I didn't realize that. And that just goes to show awareness, doesn't it? It goes to show that I'm living in my bubble, because to me, it doesn't really affect me. And, I'm glad you mentioned that. So there is a lot more that still needs to be done out there. Amara, coming on to you, I want to talk about what we mentioned earlier about you not being able to read the B's and the D's earlier. And I have a few friends who suffer from dyslexia and dyspraxia, and a friend of mine suffers from severe dyslexia, so she's constantly having to use the spell check, and she's very grateful for the person in Microsoft Word who actually created the spell check, and I can't even remember who it was, but it was someone who I think recently passed as well. But in terms of the B's and D's, now you were diagnosed in college. Now going through high school, you mentioned earlier that you felt inadequate. You used the word stupid. And I want to put this out there to all the listeners and all the viewers. Never, ever feel like that, because you are not that. You are not stupid. You are not silly. You are not inadequate. Yes, you are different, but you are different in a good way, because there's something special about each and every single one of you. And I mentor you, so I know that, and I can say that because I've got experience of being in your vicinity and having those conversations with you. But going back to the reading aspect, reading the B's and the D's and mixing them around, and your coordination, I'm trying to put words, I'm struggling to put words together, because I've literally just put myself in your shoes and thinking about what primary school and high school would have been like. And there's a word for it, which I don't really want to say out on the radio, but it would have been really difficult, right? I mean, what I want to now ask you, Amara, is for those people out there who are suffering similar situations, can you tell me, or can you tell all the listeners, what your tip would be in terms of those who are feeling the same way?
I think my biggest tip would be take your time. Don't feel like you have to keep up with everyone else. Don't feel like just because someone understands something, just because someone can read quickly, just because, you know, someone can do something a lot quicker, that don't compare yourself to someone else. Take your time, sit, think about what you're doing, and then just get it done in your own pace. There's no rush. There's nothing. Even in an exam, you know, if you have a disability, you get the 25% for a reason. If you're doing something at work, then, you know, take your time. Don't rush it, because if you rush it, you'll get it wrong. If you something which I forgot to mention earlier, which is a perfect example of my dyspraxia, is I can't put my words together properly. So I find it hard to sequence my words together. So again, to whoever's listening, I know a lot of people struggle with this, because as soon as I say this to people, it clicks in their head, and like that happens to me as well. People who don't even realize that they have a disability, or people who don't even, they'll go back and they'll come back and say, yeah, I think I have it. Just take your time. That's the first thing. Don't rush it. Speak at your own pace, read at your own pace, learn at your own pace. It's not the end of the world if you don't understand something.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much, Amara. And we have about 3 minutes left before the show ends. So if I could come to Tyler now. Now, Tyler, yours is very different. You know, it is an invisible disability, invisible mental illness. I'm not really sure which way to put it, so I do apologize if I've got it in the wrong way.
No,
but
that's fine.
what would your tip be for those people who are suffering from something that is not as easily seen?
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to speak as if I'm telling this to myself, because I think that would make it easier for me. Just, you belong. You honestly do belong. Whatever you're going through, it's fine. It's fine. It will be all right. I don't know, whatever it is that's what kind of brought this BPD along, whether it be a traumatic incident, genetics, whatever it is, you can get through it. You just need the right help, the right kind of support network, and things will get better.
Thank you very much for that, Tyler. You touched upon the imposter syndrome, where we sometimes feel like we don't belong in a place, and we therefore feel like an imposter. Yeah. And I think, you know, fantastic. We belong, absolutely. Saleha, can I come to you? We have about a minute left on the clock. So if you're able to give your top tip for those people who are maybe, you know, not as confident as you are, what would you say to them?
I would say also, as Tyler, that, you know, you belong. Just because you're physically different than the average human being doesn't mean you don't belong in the same room as them, or in the same job as them, or, you know, wherever that may be. That, you know, it doesn't matter. Accept who you are and, you know, embrace it. Don't let it, just because you're different doesn't mean, you know, you're any less entitled. You're just as much, or if not more.
Thank you very much for that, Saleha. So to the listeners and our viewers, what I want to say from that, what I've taken away from that is communication is absolute key. You know, if you don't speak up, if you do not reach out, it will be very difficult for you to get that support and assistance. Have the confidence to reach out to people, and surround yourself with positive people. Surround yourself with people who are going to lift you up and be that support system that you need. And if there is somebody negative in your life, have the confidence to get rid of them, because honestly, you do not need it. And also, you know, try and raise awareness where you can with friends and family. Like, I did not know some of the things that you guys have told me tonight, and I appreciate that. So we have about 20 seconds left on the clock. So what I do want to say is, do tune in to my show next week. It's the last episode for Breaking Stereotypes on Ramadan Radio 87.9 FM. I've got tears in my eyes. I have 2 motorbikers coming on next week, inshallah. So see you then. Allah.